Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Connection, a dual podcast bridging esports and gaming news between Korea and the West. The Connection covers all topics gaming and esports from Korea with selective deep dives each week. If you're watching live on Twitch, chat is open for participation, and if you're on YouTube, leave your thoughts in the comments below. As we always do each week, obviously a fun little look into Korea's gaming sphere can be accessed with the PC Cafe rankings. So we'll start with that this week, and then today we will be jumping into some new release information about a couple mobile games. The mobile gaming market is very big in Korea, as it generally tends to be in most parts of Asia. We have some updates on some of the esports happenings here in Korea. Most you might have actually heard about just because they were pretty well outlined. A couple news points from League of Legends. Obviously, Faker made the big announcement, or T1, I guess, made the big announcement regarding Faker and his new role, or additional role, just in case no one's seen the headline yet. He's still playing, don't be mistaken. And then towards the end, we will be talking about quite a few things that came up recently in Korea when it comes to gaming addiction, loot boxes, government and or like public association involvements, etc., etc. It was oddly, there were quite a few things coming out from from various directions along similar topics. So we'll touch upon that a little bit as well. Well, let's start with the PC Cafe rankings. Nothing too crazy this week, which is reasonable since there weren't any huge online game releases or any other big changes either. Rainbow Six Siege did get a small boost thanks to the reveal of the next update, Operation Void Edge. It definitely seems that the reveal had a much bigger impact than any hype around the 6 Invitational, but hey, we've seen Siege make a comeback in other regions, so one can hope for Korea as well. As someone who always loved these tactical, hardcore style FPSs, Siege was a game I always wanted to get into, and after hopping back in this week, I am glad I made that choice. In fact, we're going to be playing more of that today after the podcast as well. I've been really enjoying it. I think part of it is just because since I've been keeping up with various esports events for Siege, I guess trying to get back into it or really learn it, because I never really got to sit down and play the game and really learn it. I just played it mostly during the beta, actually, before release. So probably following along quite a bit here and there has helped me jump start in the beginning and not feel too lost. And seeing how other people have been playing the game probably helps a bit. So for those of you guys who maybe are feel like it's a little bit daunting, definitely recommend checking out some of the higher level players, or even just influencers that have stuck with the game from the beginning, because they know the ins and outs, and that'll help you not feel as lost even if you don't know the maps and such other things. There also seem to be some solid PC Cafe benefits, so we'll find out if that continues to help as well. That's obviously a very big thing for online games in Korea. I talked about that briefly before as well. A good example is also like PUBG had, they went about a couple different ways, since the game was also released on Steam, obviously, but then in Korea was also published through Kakao. They had some different mechanisms they took initially on, whether you could play for free or not, and then it has now, I think, changed to, if you don't own it on Steam, you just, you pay extra per game time for your usage at the PC Cafe, I believe. But it, that seems to still work out for them, because it's been very, very high up. And I think these days a lot of people own it on Steam as well. Also, with Siege continuing to grow rather globally, especially obviously in the West, this is really good news for me personally, just as an FPS fan. Obviously, Siege continues to grow. Project A has a lot of hype riding behind it, although I'm starting to get a little concerned because I feel like the hype's getting ahead of itself, and it looks like maybe some of the dev team felt the same way. I forget who it was, which one it was. One of them tweeted out a couple days ago that, hey, we talked about how we'll have more information in March, and then some journalists seemed to think that meant that we were going to have a beta in March, and that's not what we meant. We'll just announce more information later. So I think there's definitely a little bit of concern that maybe things are getting too ahead of itself, and we've seen that not work out so great for for a number of different games. So I do hope we as a community are not the ones that run that game into the ground, that we, wait patiently. And then if we need to give constructive critical feedback, obviously, hopefully that helps. Anyway, we'll get back to the PC Cafe rankings. I went on a little bit of a tangent there. FIFA Online 4 gained a lot more players this past week, closely following PUBG in 3rd place, while putting Overwatch further behind in 4th place as well. This was thanks to their Valentine's Day event. We see this pretty frequently. Any updates or events and online games that have retained a solid player base will easily rise to the top 5 or even top 3 whenever they put out a event based around like the calendar year or big updates, content, patch updates. We've seen this continuously happen with Sudden Attack in the past, FIFA Online, obviously, and MapleStory as well. And I think it's one of those things where if the game has survived the test of time and it continues to retain a certain player base, any big push, it'll push you right back up into those rankings. And maybe you don't retain it for a long period of time, but some games have been able to kind of stick it for a couple extra weeks or maybe even a couple months, and then if they're not able to keep up that same pace, then they drop back down as well. In other gaming news not related to PC cafes, A3 Still Alive is a mobile squad-based battle royale. Now that I'm looking at it, that's actually that's a lot of qualifiers for a single genre, but it is a mobile squad-based battle royale from Netmarble. And that game is hosting a second streamer tournament. The game itself is not actually released yet. I think you can reserve a spot to get early access. But they already hosted one streamer tournament, and they're hosting another one, I think, in a couple days here. And the game is a reimagining of Netmarble's older title, A3. I'm gonna guess a lot of you are not aware of what that is because it's from 2002. But anyway, now it's in mobile and then battle royale form. The gameplay looks pretty interesting. In fact, I was actually introduced to the game via certain gameplay clips, and initially I did not realize that it was a mobile game. The UI wasn't there, etc. So I didn't realize it was a mobile game, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, like a squad-based ARPG type battle royale. That seems cool. And then I found out it was mobile, and I was like, oh, okay, wasn't really expecting that. But as mobile games continue to grow and develop their own gameplay, I think it's worth looking into. For me personally, I think the biggest qualm I've had with mobile games is just really the screen size and then the battery life. I've never been too great with smaller screen sizes. Some of you guys are going to come up and be like, well, have you never played the Game Boy? And I played the heck out of the original Game Boy. But also those games were not 3D with bright colors and action RPG type combat, right? Those were 2D sprites that were designed for that screen. And obviously mobile games are designed for that screen, but I think because the technology has gone so far ahead, we see a lot of advanced graphics, advanced gameplay, and I think mobile game development is still in that stage where you kind of take a big leap forward in tech, and then you follow up and you kind of try to match that in gameplay, and then you have to take half a step back to find a good balance for what works on that platform. Overall, over time, it's definitely grown. But for me personally, for instance, to give some reference, the Switch is probably the most ideal screen size or relative screen size for me when it comes to mobile gaming. For instance, I enjoyed playing certain mobile games on my iPad way back when. But even my I have a Galaxy Note, and even that I have trouble playing a lot of these more, I guess, graphically intensive games, mobile games. So we'll see. Obviously, there's plenty of different genres coming out for mobile games these days, and in fact, hopping on the back of A3 Still Alive, Terra is actually getting a new look as well, called Terra Heroes for mobile. If you don't know Terra, it is a MMORPG, and it was actually, and I don't know if a lot of you guys know this actually, Terra was developed by Bluehole, and you might recognize Bluehole in relation to PUBG. Obviously now PUBG standalone as PUBG Corp, but back in the day it was it was a part of Bluehole Studios. But anyway, Terra is coming back. It is again, this is also an action like real-time combat action RPG, MMORPG. And this time, the mobile version is being developed by Red Sahara. But that's not that far off, because Red Sahara is part of a union called the Craft On Union of Game Studios, which includes Red Sahara, the initial devs of Terra Bluehole, and also, therefore, PUBG Core as well. Currently, the game only has plans for a domestic release in Korea, but if all goes well, they have said, and after things stabilize, they may consider releasing it in other major regions for Terra as well. Looks like most of the gameplay is pretty similar to the core gameplay of Terra, as it is on PC as well. I've only seen a couple clips. They recently did a bit of a media day to introduce the game to everyone. But it looks like it is a real-time combat action RPG. It looks very beautiful, actually, from a graphical standpoint. Again, personally, that means I'm a little concerned about whether I would enjoy it on a small screen. But, you know, others who are maybe used to that or used to mobile gaming may be able to enjoy it quite a bit. Now, I think from what I can gather, you are collecting characters to fill out a squad. Basically, I guess that's where Heroes comes from, Terra Heroes. And so it's not that you're just creating one character and then developing them into, you choose a class and a profession, but it looks like you're collecting a variety of them, and that's how you get your quote-unquote classes, I assume. And they've said that they want to avoid a loot box or gacha-based system, but they also later said, when they were asked, hey, what's the main business model? They were talking about how they want to make sure that people who, invest a lot financially feel satisfied about their investment, but also people who don't, can just enjoy it as is, and they don't feel that they're behind. And then, right after that, their follow-up statement was, that's why we leaned towards a system where you can there's a, you basically, spin for heroes. Or I think the exact wording they used was, the way you acquire heroes is random, aka you're rolling for them, but that is literally a loot box. But then they also followed up with saying you can also unlock every character at least at launch, and obviously there's a conditional there, through quests. So I think their point is that this isn't like, these days there's a lot of purely gacha based mobile games where maybe even if you're not paying cash for it, the only way to get characters or monsters or whatever is by acquiring these eggs or boxes, and then you get a random 3-star whatever, right? That's how a lot of these mobile RPGs are. I think what they're saying is that's not their core mechanic, but there will be a cash shop where you can purchase them, but I guess then it's also random, and therefore you don't feel like you have to pay cash. So yeah, so a combination of loot boxes, but you can also unlock every character through quests. It is interesting to me that they said initially at launch. Obviously, they're probably just saying that just to cover in case they change their business model. But that definitely opens it up to, hey, let's say they do a update and they say for this season's characters, you can only get them through the cash shop, and I'm sure that won't go over well, but it does open it up for that kind of scenario. I think at the end of the day, they are trying to consider how to make this work. The other weird controversy I found is that they said that they don't want financial investments to be necessary or feel like the money is holding a player back when they don't want to invest in it financially. But they also said the main focus of microtransactions will be upgrading gear, which sounds it sounds very pay to win, but that also, I guess, depends on game mechanic, right? How much does that matter? If it's, if PvP is the end game, then obviously it's going to matter a lot. But, depending on how, I don't know, depending on the end game content, maybe it doesn't necessarily mean pay to win. It literally just means that you get to enjoy things quicker, but you're not necessarily winning in comparison. So I will hold my judgment, but I personally, as someone who, I'm not averse to microtransactions, honestly, actually. growing up with a lot of these Korean MMORPGs, I'm not against it at the core. I'm pretty used to it, but I think, as we see more and more games poorly implement microtransactions, I think there's a lot of arguments to be made in how you present it. I think that's what matters the most. So we'll see. Again, this game is not released yet, even in Korea. So once it releases, this is one I'll definitely give a try. I don't know if I'll be able to enjoy it long term because it's on mobile. And again, nothing against mobile games. I just have trouble with the screen size, and my thumbs are pretty big, so the controls get a little hard. But I'll definitely check it out because I loved Terra on PC. I loved it when it first came out. A funny little update actually in mobile games is it's a game called, so in Korean it's called Suksak, and so it's an onomatopoeia. And if you're not aware of what an onomatopoeia is, it's like pow, crunch, like it's the words that describe sound. And I don't know if it's intentional because the marketing and technical name is Suk and then Sak, like separately as singular onomatopoeias, where Suk is the sound for like dodging something stealthily or smoothly, right? It's like a smooth movement, quick smooth movement. Basically like you would see this a lot with like ninjas or whatever, right? And then Sak is the sound of attacking swiftly, usually with the blade, but it can be used more to note the swiftness rather than the actual weapon. But Suksak, as put together, can also be an expression of like slicing something. So I just thought that was interesting. But the game is Suk and then Sak. There's like an exclamation mark after each one. So I don't know if that was intentional. I just thought it was a little interesting. This game, I said this was a funny little update because this game listen, I know there's a lot of repetition in the mobile market regarding games and seemingly copying each other and the same core gameplay loop. I get that, but I saw a gameplay clip, and this is just Arch Hero, like straight up. It's like a 1-for-1. Again, I won't say copy because I'm assuming it's not, but it is just Arch Hero. If you don't know Arch Hero, for some reason, like I for a while I was getting that game advertised on like all my social media platforms, which was very weird. I'm gonna assume I'm gonna go ahead and blame it on Maven because for the longest time that's all he was talking about on Twitter, and because of that, I used to find the ads annoying, and then I downloaded the game, and then I ended up playing it for a very long time, like all the time when I was on the subway here. Just when I'm lying in bed or whatever, I would just be playing it, and I hated myself for it. But the game was very enjoyable. It was very fun, actually. So if you haven't played Arch Hero, it's basically it's got the like roguelike element of if you die, you lose everything and you come back, and then you get like random upgrades after you clear each room, rinse, repeat. There's different enemies. And Success basically like that. I just thought it was interesting because it seems like a straight copy, and this is only released domestically, so it's not like they're trying to compete with it, but they also clearly invested a lot in marketing it because the marketing campaign had hired a comedian and a actress, so celebrities, not like the biggest, but also not like unknown. Like if I can recognize them, especially comedians, like off the bat, then they're definitely not small celebrities. So they did that, and then the reaction seemed to be fairly positive. So I mean, maybe Arch Hero just wasn't really making it in Korea. I actually don't know. I never looked into that because my phone market actually I think is still tied to the US market, the Play Store, probably because my Google account is tied to the US. But yeah, so if it works, it works. I guess you just develop it a little differently for your own community, and then you move forward with it. All right, well, on the esports front, the biggest news was, of course, the kickoff and return of the ASL, the Africa Star League, with some exciting names like Bisu. If you're not a StarCraft fan, Bisu is a name on the same level of other names you might have heard, like Flash or Jaedong. Essentially, Bisu, Stork, Flash, and Jaedong made up an Elite Four called Tekbeng Lisang during their prime. It's actually there's a lot of obviously history and story behind these players, so definitely worth a little look up and a read if you're interested in some esports history, and especially StarCraft history in Korea. Bisu ended up finishing second in his group, so he will be moving on, while Stork also had a great start, finishing first in his group. Flash was also could be found commentating over the feed on his personal channel, as he doesn't have to play until the round of 16. So it was very cool getting to see Flash commentate games that Bisu was playing, and kind of talking about, you know, an old rival and an old comrade, and just watching his gameplay. Even with StarCraft Remastered, it is crazy to see Brood War being played and watched for, I mean, now 21 years, consistently. And for some of these players to continue being at the top as well, like Flash, you know, and then Bisu and Stork continuing to, you know, come back after maybe a couple breaks here and there, and then be at the top of their game in, you know, in a game so old. And some of these players, right, they had trouble transitioning into StarCraft 2, but then they're showcasing that when it comes to the original, they just know the game so well inside and out. I think it's like actually just insane, just both the player level and also the fact that this game is continuing to thrive in Korea in terms of just how it's received and perceived. Yeah, now that I'm talking about it, I can't imagine, you know, how like any other game really carrying that. Obviously, League is going very strong at 10 years, but I think, you know, League took a different route as a free-to-play game, and it continues to basically update itself. I mean, essentially, if you really want to look back, what we have now in a different world could very easily be called League of Legends 2.0, right? And it could have been released as League 2.0, because if you played League in Season 1, or even in beta, like, this is not the League we had. Not at all. In so many ways, both on a technical front and like gameplay mechanics and everything. It's just a different game now. The only similarity is it's a MOBA. So it's so interesting to see. Obviously, you know, remastered and had some changes that people didn't like, you know, and, you know, obviously the graphical updates some people liked, but essentially that helped a little bit. But I don't think, you know, I don't think you can look at this and say remastered is the reason StarCraft continues to be popular. I think it's because that core fan base never went anywhere. Maybe they started playing less and less as they grew older, but I don't think they ever left. Kurobi says, how are the rivalries in StarCraft? Are they mostly friendly, or do they get aggressive sometimes? I mean, they're mostly friendly. Like on broadcast, they've, you know, especially in the past for StarCraft, a lot of these StarCraft players have had moments where, you know, they'll trash talk quite a bit actually, and in very insulting ways, and but all for show, right? StarCraft being a 1v1 game, it was very hard for the top of the top to not respect each other, unless you were cheating, right? Unless you were like cheating or match fixing. I think it was very hard. I think it's very hard to not respect each other. And you know, for instance, in my personal experience, and just from watching, you know, people stream it in the past as well, obviously there are people who get angry and they rage and flame in StarCraft as well. But if you watch ladder matches, right, like typing GLHF at the beginning and then GG at the end is just, it's just common practice. Whereas like League, like even I don't type GG at the end anymore, mostly because I'm lazy about it. But I think it just breeds this culture of like, we all know that if you won, it's because of you, and if you lost, it's because of you, because there's only you in a 1v1 setting. So I think there's a little bit more camaraderie in that sense. I think fighting games, I would say that fighting games are up there as well. I think fighting games, sometimes the aggression goes a little further. There's also more factors to quote unquote, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but quote unquote complain about, just because there are more characters, right? StarCraft has 3 races. So while you can, you know, you could, if you wanted to, complain about the balance, etc., and I'm very positive at times it is wrong, but you know, there's I think less to pick on. But I would say that in most cases, fighting game rivalries are also, like, skill-based rivalries, I think are fairly non-aggressive. You know, I think they'll trash talk, etc. for the show, but you know, I don't think they're like at events and like not saying hi to each other, right? Some I know they don't, but for instance, like when we ran Street Fighter stuff at ESL, and we'd have players, you know, that might have some rivalries, etc. I didn't see them having any trouble sitting in the same space. So I think it's just a different culture. Well, that's a lot of the information for ASL. Obviously, it just started, so if you want to keep up with it, you can definitely check it out on Africa TV. And you can also then listen to one of the best duos to grace us in esports, which is Tastosis. And, you know, obviously they've had a long love for Broodor as well, being themselves coming from that game as a career. So it's always fun to watch them being able to talk about a game they love. Otherwise, LCK, League of Legends, had a great match where Faker and Teddy of T1 once again showed that they can still be the most dominant players. Always a pleasure to see those two really performing at the top. But DRX still leads the league. But DRX also kicked off the week with a bit of a mishap of broadcasting a scrim with Griffin publicly. And if you're following League of Legends pretty closely, you've probably heard about this. They often use an unlisted YouTube stream for their coaching staff, but it appears the settings were overlooked this time as it went public. Unfortunately, not the first time DRX has had a scrim mishap, as in the past they also had a player forget to close the results screen before turning on their personal stream, and therefore kind of releasing, you know, what was played and who performed how. As someone who's had a crew make the same mistake, you know, we once had a rehearsal and recording of a sponsored segment be streamed live as we were just fooling around at an IEM. I can totally understand how it can happen, but at the same time, I'd say unless you're just like testing settings, etc., an unlisted stream isn't an ideal scenario. I don't have a great solution to cover that, so I'm not talking about it just because I have a different solution, unless, you know, everyone wants to somehow set up their own server that they can stream to. But you know, it's at the end of the day, if it's an unlisted stream, it is still on that platform, and if people really wanted to, they could find a way to find it. So hopefully, you know, no more mishaps for now, and hopefully, you know, teams can maybe sort out a different way to manage this. Anyway, DRX did post a formal apology, which is, I mean, that's the most you can do at that point, and that's the end of that. Hopefully no more of that happens through the season, because it can definitely be a sensitive issue when it comes to scrims, and also definitely create some sour situations if it, you know, happens more than once or at a sensitive time like near playoffs or something like that. Oh, before we move on, actually almost forgot, Africa TV revealed the first look to their new stadium called the Coliseum. This will be located in Jamsil, so not far from their current studio, and looks like the facility will seat up to 600 people, have a giant 50-meter screen up front, and all facilities necessary for events, including things like player green rooms, press rooms, and even services for special aid as well. There's also a cafe for drinks, and a PC cafe actually named after Keen from Africa Freaks. So this will be the home to, you know, future PUBG esports events that they do, StarCraft tournaments, obviously, and a number of other esports titles. Alongside, they've said, things like concerts, pool tournaments, and ping pong tournaments. So first we got darts on OGN, now we're going to have ping pong on Africa, and I think we're pretty much ready for the full esports sports anime crossover here in Korea. So we'll see how that develops. And as I mentioned in the beginning, yes, there was the news about Faker now being a part owner of T1. I'm not talking about it a lot, not because it's not big news. It's actually huge, right? It's a very big deal, and I'm very happy for Faker because I think it means a lot to him. Obviously, it means a lot to the company, but for the company, it's more that there's a big benefit for them, especially if he really sticks to the role properly. But obviously, as a player, this is big recognition, and also with how T1 has developed now as an organization that is, you know, co-owned by Comcast and SKT, and it's not just SKT in Korea. I think that's, to me, that's the biggest part. I haven't seen too many people talking about that specific portion, but for Korean esports, players have always had so much trouble like doing something afterwards. And, maybe you become a coach, maybe you become a head coach, a general manager, but at the end of the day, you're just playing in the Korean market in the past, right? And the Korean market is very, very small. For a lot of esports fans, you watch esports from Korea and you say, hey, this looks really cool and their shows are really good and they seem to have a lot of money. And it's like, well, no, it's because also things are therefore relatively cheaper than they are, say in the States. But like, Korea is a very small country, right? At the end of the day, there is a finite number of wons, which is the Korean currency, going around. And therefore, like, sponsors just, some people will be like, oh, well, like, oh, this time this was, let's say, like, sponsored by Coca-Cola. But it's like, no, it's sponsored by Coca-Cola Korea, let's say, right? If it's sponsored by Coke, which is now a much smaller division of Coca-Cola. And therefore, sometimes it has been in the past harder for tournaments or organizations to get these global brands to sponsor them because the market's just not that big in Korea. Obviously, these have started changing with these organizations that have global ownership and then run teams in Korea. So I think to me, that's the biggest part of the story. For a Korean player to now be a part owner of a global organization is a very big deal. So congratulations to Faker. But again, the news was also broken by ESPN, so there's a lot of information out there if you're interested. So we won't be covering that since it's already global news and not from Korea. All right. Well, that's a lot for kind of the big headlines, both in gaming and esports. And now to talk about, a trend that I've seen in the past week, and I mentioned this in the beginning of the podcast. So, as I was going through, as I've been doing every week now, just, these news articles, different communities, watching different Korean streamers, and just kind of seeing what's happening here and there, there was an interesting trend of news topics and articles coming out, mostly regarding online games, addiction, and politics. Part of it is definitely related to election season being here in Korea, but there was a lot more than that, which I think, I'm wondering, as I said in the beginning, if it's just because of calendar year where we are. It's for a lot of companies, it's the end of the fiscal year. So I've actually seen a lot of articles trying to cover and report on the updates from various game companies on their past year and their performance. But anyway, there were quite a few headlines. So let's start with a slightly humorous facepalm moment within gaming and politics. So there was a candidate from an area called Bundang, and if you don't know, Bundang is home to a area called Pangyo. So basically, think of it as like Bundang is like a county, and then Pangyo is like a district, or Bundang's like you know what? That's a better way to put it. Or Pangyo is like a city within it. So Pangyo is what you call Korea's Silicon Valley. So it has a lot of IT companies, but it also has Bundang and Pangyo as a whole have a lot of gaming companies like Nexon. That's where their headquarters are, right? That's where they all go to work. All these games are coming out of this area. And so there was a candidate running in Bundang, and one of their campaign slogans, and I don't think it was all throughout either. I think it was just like one they released in January, said, "Would you trust your government to someone who makes video games?" And I can't. I just and the reason they said that was the follow-up argument was the guy who was running comes from like IT and like AI developing companies and like big data research. So I guess the argument was, hey, like IT and AI development is very important to Bundang in Korea, and this guy has all the experience from like a tech and business standpoint. But you can't possibly go to an area that is pretty much the hotspot for game development in your country and then be like, oh, would you trust someone who makes video games to work in your government? So that didn't go so well. He lost in the primaries. So he's out. I think like the day after the results for the initial primary came out, he like put up a statement saying, as someone who was new to politics, I think I just wasn't experienced enough, etc. And I was like, I don't know. I don't even know about anything else that you've done, man. But even if you had the best ideas, like that slogan alone would have made sure you didn't win. So hopefully no more of that. But that's a bit of a humorous side note. Recently, the Game Rating and Administration Committee, actually, in Korea, GRAC for short, released a guide for teachers and parents on the usage of video games and how they can properly administer gameplay for their children. The guide will be distributed through schools throughout the country, and online versions will be available as well afterwards. It's noted that they cover a lot on, parental settings for all platforms and devices to properly enforce ratings and also be educated on what games your child may or may not be playing. There's also some guidance included on game ratings themselves, what they mean, loot box mechanics, and also how to administrate game time for your children. And I think the goal for GRAC, because they're the Game Rating and Administration Committee, is to help advise on the positive sides of video games as well, and not just the negatives or what you need to, I guess, like block from your children. This is mostly aimed at parents and teachers who may not be familiar with games to begin with. Personally, I think this is very, very important. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see the actual content and then determine if this was a good step or maybe a bit of a mishap, but this is also one of the project avenues that currently lies as a priority for me in terms of not educating necessarily gamers themselves, but parents, because as gaming, we live in a generation where gaming blew up so quickly as an entertainment source, right? Whether it's playing, watching, esports, whatever it may be, that I think a lot of parents maybe just weren't prepared for that, right? Maybe you didn't grow up playing games, and you can say that easily about, for instance, let's say the generation of my parents, right? Like they maybe just didn't have as many video games available, obviously, so maybe they didn't grow up. But I would say even my peers, right? Within my friend group, obviously a lot of us played video games, but a ton of my friends also didn't. It also depends on what region you're from, right? Maybe the video game industry just didn't really catch on until much later in that region. And I think there's a lot of people that either look at video games negatively because of, just negatively because of lack of information, or also therefore aren't really guiding their children well enough that the children are just kind of at the mercy of taking in whatever video games they can, they can get their hands on. And that's like the same thing as, say, the problems that we might have with YouTube and streaming, right? Because, or the internet in general, there's just so much information available, so much entertainment available. And for children of certain age groups, they just might not be educated about it in terms of not even just what's good or bad, but having the background to determine for themselves what's good or bad. Right? Like certain things can be very clear cut, but certain things are maybe, up for interpretation based on, what your goals are, what your morals are, what your culture is, excuse me. And I think, the argument can be said that at certain age groups, you just don't have all that background information to determine that for yourself. And so I think having these projects that help educate parents on gaming is very important. And personally, again, this is something that's been weighing very heavily for me, and something that I really want to work on, whether it's, in things like these as like guides, or whether it's having a chance to really be able to share my experiences or knowledge. And my personal goal would be trying to offer an objective enough view so they can help shape a healthy environment for their child's gaming culture as they see fit. Again, everyone's a bit different. Cultures and trends differ as well. So I'm not going to sit there and say, I think this is the golden way to play video games and consume video games, because I don't think that exists. But I think it's important for parents to be aware and educated, and therefore make educated decisions rather than allow or disallow things with sweeping selection. And I would say that you know, a lot of this comes from my personal experience growing up as well. So, you know, I grew up in a family where I wasn't allowed, you know, I had a timer for my video game time as a kid. Our consoles and all of our PCs were always in the living room. I did not have a personal computer until college, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah, so I didn't have my own computer or laptop until college. And there, you know, as I grew up, obviously, like once I was in high school, there wasn't like a strict timer on, hey, you can only play like an hour today or whatever. But because it was in the living room, it was very clear when I was playing video games or not. And I think that moderation, you know, some people will be like, wow, that's so strict. But personally, I look back and I say, I think that's the reason that even the times when I was on my own, let's say in college, and I was playing, I look back and I would objectively say too much video games. Like the reason I could get out of it and snap out of it when I needed to was because of that background, right? And then, for instance, I think I talked about this before. Like I wasn't allowed to play Brood War as a kid in Korea. In Korea, imagine that, because my mom decided it was too violent. I think it was mostly the aliens, actually, the Zergs, that she didn't like. But and then the fact that they like explode and make all this noise when the Marines shoot them. But she was like, no, that's not healthy. So I wasn't allowed to play that. But then again, I like played Dragon Ball. There was like an old Dragon Ball fighting game for the Super Nintendo. I was allowed to play that. So, you know, again, different. I guess it's really just how it was perceived. But then in high school, my mom was also the same person who bought me Battlefield 2 and Call of Duty Modern Warfare. And these are like straight up FPSs, right? And she wasn't a big fan of them. She was like, I don't know about this. I actually think Modern Warfare was rated mature, right? And I think so we went together to buy it, obviously, and I think the person who was working at the GameStop was like, oh, so you got your mom to buy this for you, huh? And then my mom was like, yeah, like, what do you think about it being rated mature? And I think he was like kind of taken aback, and he was like, I mean, you know, he just explained what it meant and that, you know, what type of game it is. And I remember my mom was like, yeah, I don't know about that. But she still bought it for me, knowing that obviously I'm playing it in the living room, and she was able to kind of see what it was like. And then she was also very sensitive about me playing games online. Like me joining a clan and like talking to these clanmates that I don't know in Call of Duty Modern Warfare. But initially she was against it, but then, you know, she kind of let it pass. But I think I was also just much more aware. Like sometimes I was annoyed, but I was also just much more aware of like what type of conversations I was having with people I didn't know, right? And that I know no background about, I guess, is a little more important, because we just might have different standards. And again, I think all of this, you know, I look back and I say, you know what? I think even that level of like moderation or parenting, and then my dad like just didn't play video games at all when I was a kid, or even still, but because, and I think this was one of the bigger learnings for me as well, I was told later that he didn't do it because he knew that he could easily get addicted to games, because he used to apparently really enjoy like the old video games like Pac-Man and stuff, but he was so strict about it for himself that as a kid I was playing Mario, I forget which one, but I wanted to play with my dad because it was the weekend. And initially, like, I think he just like wasn't thinking about it, and he said sure. And then when I handed him the controller because it was his turn to play as Luigi, he like didn't play, and I was like, what? And I got really upset. But later I found out again it's because like he just had this standard for himself of like, I'm just not gonna play games because if I start I'm gonna get hooked. And knowing all these things, I think comes because my parents were also, you know, for their generation, exposed to video games enough, right? Like my mom had, you know, played various video games as well, either because, you know, her friends had them or, you know, relatives had them. And my both my parents are fairly interested in video game mechanics. Like my mom actually enjoyed, I've talked about this before, definitely on stream, enjoyed playing certain video games with me, and especially like puzzle games and platformers. She was a big fan. And I think because of that, they were able to at least accept that there could be positives, even for that generation. But they still, had their own parenting standards. So what this all comes down to is, I look back and say, all right, I think I was fortunate enough to have, on a relative scale, parents who were fairly, I would say, aware of what video games were, and therefore, had some moderation rules for me, but I could also enjoy it at a reasonable level, at a healthy level, and then even when I perhaps was consuming it not at a healthy level, eventually I could grow back out of it because of the background I had. Whereas if I didn't have that, or if I was like, let's say as a kid I just wasn't allowed to touch video games at all, I think once that snapped in college, I probably would have been like fully like a full degenerate, just playing video games, not doing anything, and not turning those video game hours into anything either. So this is very, it's very core to some of the visions that I have for my career on like what I want to achieve is, again, not educating gamers, because I think especially like gamers over a certain age, like you kind of know what you're looking for, you kind of know where you're going, and at that point it's so much of your other background and education that matters, but more so parents on just, hey, like here's just what's going on, here's what video games are, and here's what is trending these days, and here's the layout. If you think it's good, great. If you think it's bad, great. But here's what you need to know to make that decision, rather than me going up to them being like, I don't know, as an example, like Doom is bad or whatever, right? Like that's not what I want to do. But more so just tell them like, here's what Doom is, and here's what you're going to see, and here's what's going to be engaged. And if you think that's okay, because you think, your child can accept it as a video game, great. Or whatever. Or if you just don't think that's good, then that's fine too. Everyone has different standards. So it's very cool to see that this is coming out and being distributed. I guess we went on a pretty long tangent. So if you don't remember what we were talking about, we're talking about the guide for teachers and parents being released by the Game Rating and Administration Committee in Korea. It's being distributed through schools and then will be available online. So that's very cool to see. Now, something that can be a bit controversial was actually a recent patent on, and don't get riled up, on researching game addiction or gaming addiction via blood tests. Which, okay, so I'll be honest, I haven't had the chance to like fully dive into this yet. I've read a couple articles on it. I haven't like done all of my own scientific research. But it appears that this is an extension of an initiative from the government back in 2014 called, again, don't get riled up, the Internet and Gaming Detox Business. And this was a R&D, or research and development initiative, to develop ways to diagnose and combat online and gaming addiction through neuroscience. Now, again, it's a very sensational headline, especially from a gamer viewpoint. There's some concern on there's several concerns about all of this, but I think the initial concern back in 2014 was that there's a concern about grouping the two together, like internet addiction and then gaming addiction, which I think is fair because I think they're quite different. And then now this new patent is giving the initiative, the overall program, a second wind. Obviously, the gaming industry is a bit concerned since it seems a lot of this is a bit misguided. For instance, the tests seem very limited. I think it was like less than 100 people that they tested, which, listen, I'm not a scientist, but in today's world, like that seems like a very small sample. Like 100 people seems, it just seems infinitely small to say that you have a hypothesis, or to say that you're like even partially proving a hypothesis. Also, their basis, or their like conclusion, I guess, lies on the fact that you can see similar patterns in gaming addiction akin to alcohol or substance addiction, which, again, not a scientist, but seems like a pretty weak foundation. Now, Now, this is coming from someone, and I'm just gonna say this outright. I do think gaming addiction